Hi, PJ. Welcome to Revolutionary Journey, Episode 3.
Really awesome that we have this episode 3, and I'm really excited to talk about the topic today. How are you?
First and foremost, I am doing well. It is, it's a good day. It's sun is shining, so life is good. Yeah. How about you?
Life is good. I'm currently in South Korea right now, doing a bit of travel before I head to my other destination, which is Guam, and that's where I'm from originally. So exciting.
Very exciting to have you on the other side of the world.
Mhm.
So let me kick off and think of what are we going to talk about today, because we do have an exciting topic.
Yes, exactly. So we're talking about the third episode. The first episode was around self-awareness, second self-doubts. And we figured, why don't we talk about values? How do we define and understand our values innately? And then how do we emulate that outwardly? How do we live that? Things like that. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Values.
Yes. A very short thing, but very important.
Yeah.
And I think it's important because this is a topic that we don't talk about a lot, not something that very often, even not with your friends, not with your colleagues, you have a conversation where you say, by the way, what are your values? How we actually live those values and that show that those values are something that is very important for us. But before we get in there, let's talk about what do you think is a value anyway, and how do you define those for yourself?
Yep. Great question. I see values as more of a guidepost, return to form, so to speak, right? So if I'm doing something, if I'm in an interaction, if I'm solving something, it's another way for me to be like, okay, is what am I doing? What I'm doing aligning with what I value innately? If the answer is yes or no, that's my pivot point. For me, it's a guidepost to figure out if what I'm doing is worth it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. It's very similar for me. I always think that values are like a compass. It's a way that helps me make decisions through different lenses. When I know what I value and what is important to me, does this align with what I value or is it working against it? What I've discovered is that when you are and when I am in with alignment with my values, life is not easier, but I feel better. I'm more internally focused. I feel my purpose happening better and showing up in the world versus when I am doing things that are not the way I want to be, what I value, and going against my strong beliefs about how I want to live my life. Then I actually start getting sick. Sometimes it's physically sick, sometimes it's mentally sick, and my body saying, hey, no, something is off. How does that work for you?
It works in a similar manner. I'll use a personal story. I have a family history of plaque psoriasis, right? And for those of you who don't know, it's a chronic systemic disease, meaning there's going to be some seasons where you go without it, but then there's going to be some seasons where you have flare ups. So those flare ups are the signal to me that I need to really look at what I'm putting into my body because it's manifesting externally. That's how I live with my values. If I'm feeling sick physically or mentally, if I'm feeling exhausted, if I'm just not feeling good in general, that is a good hallmark for me to figure out. Let me actually stop and figure out if the work I'm doing, if the way I'm living aligns well to what I value.
Yeah.
So, for example, if I'm at work and I'm just exhausted, so then it's actually, let me take a moment to figure out what exactly about work is exhausting me. I don't think we're innately exhausted. It's a way for me to figure out what's going on inside so I can be a bit more present.
I agree with that. It's a way of figuring out what's working, what's not working. And when we discussed in the previous episode the self-awareness, that's where recognizing that there are moments in your life when you need to push yourself to work, cannot sleep well, and so on. You try and figure out what is actually working and what is not. Very often, what I observed in myself is that it comes back to values and the things I find important. I cannot live by or do my work by. So that is something that affects me a lot. I recently had this experience when I was working in a new environment, new company, and just the way of working and the way of making decision and the way of, let's say, what I define as ownership and people having autonomy to do their best work is very important for me. The base for me in the work situation, you need to allow people to play to what makes them great and the best version of themselves. That is not measuring everyone by the same stick. That's very different for every person. Just acknowledging that is very important. My pet animal is a penguin, right? I love to talk about penguins because penguins are are birds, but when you judge them as a bird that is able to fly and move through the land, they're really awkward. But when you see them swimming, they're the most beautiful creature out there. So that's why I think we're all a little bit like penguins. We need to find our environment, find our way of how we best do our work. And when I was in an environment where I couldn't do that for myself, I couldn't do that for my team because of the culture, the build up, it's a corporate algorithm of like, this is how we do things here. Then it really started affecting me in a way that I really didn't manifest it in getting sick, but also in this deep feeling of what am I doing here? This hustle every day to like, getting to work and showing up in a way that I didn't like. I did not have the motivation, urgency, and curiosity to solve the problems as best as I can. It just died out.
Yeah.
And it was such an important part of me before. It was kind of an interesting experience for me in that sense.
Yeah, exactly. I think I can relate to this. I worked for a company where the setup was pretty similar.
Mm.
Coming out of that experience, it was important for me to reflect, but also recover from it. Think about it like this, where your dominant arm or my dominant arm, it's broken, right? So I'm going to have to write with my left hand and do other things with my left hand while I work towards recovery. You're doing something that is just so not normal, especially if you're not ambidextrous. And so you operate that way for so long that when your right arm heals, you're like, oh my gosh, thank you. And now you're going back into your normal routine. You're still getting things done. You're still problem solving, but you're not maybe writing the fastest. You're not moving things the fastest. When I say I needed to reflect on it, it was more, okay, when I go into a new company, how do I ensure that their values align? I mean, they're not going to align completely, but how do they align mostly to the values that how are you recovering from that?
I think there's a couple of things worth unpacking. But first of all, how do you know that things are gonna be in line with what you believe? That's a big question, and sometimes very hard to discover the first. Let's say when you go to a new company through the interviews, sometimes it's hard because it's kind of like a play. The interview process is like a game.
Yeah.
After a moment, I can figure out what they want to hear, and I can say that,
Mhm.
or I can give an honest answer with what I believe. I always say it's this game that you can play. If you start going through like, I'm just going to play this game to get there,
Mhm.
those answers that you gave that were not in line with what you actually did will come up sooner or later. The question was about how am I recovering? And I think what I started to realize is that the values you have, they're intrinsic, they're your values, the things you believe because of how you live your life, what you find important, and so on. But the environment you are in is just so important.
Mhm.
And the let's say that the whole ecosystem that you're part of has such a huge influence on you that even when you are a person who is open, curious, and creative, when you're in an environment that does not value that and doesn't allow you to be that way, you stop being that.
Yes.
And that is just something that for me, the environment where you are cannot change how you are. But actually, I started believing that it really can. I remember realizing that this is not a place where I want to be after a couple of weeks. And then, like, I was talking to my friend and said, like, hey, the biggest fear I have is that if I stay there for too long, I'm going to become like that. Something that hit me really hard. This happens to all of us. It's like, no matter if it's relationship, work, life, the house you live in, the way you spend your days is changing you because the things around you have so much influence on you that you don't necessarily realize. The way for me to recover from that is get yourself out of the environment that you don't want to be part of and start creating the ecosystem around you that you want to be part of. Be with people that inspire you, be with people that believe in you, be with people that make you the person that you want to be and not a copy of themselves because that's maybe what they want.
Exactly. There's something that you said that really resonated with me, which was you don't want to be around people and you don't want to be there long enough to be like these folks, right? That to me is probably the synthesis of one of the roles that I had previously. I knew probably in my third or fourth month that this wasn't the place for me, that it was more of a command and control and less of a creative and candor type of environment. The reason why that is important for me was because they kept telling me, don't lower your standards, hold yourself to excellence and all stuff. And I was like, can you look into the mirror when you say that? Because if I were to hold everybody to the standard that you're talking about, you wouldn't fit the bill. These are people that are reported into. These are very senior leaders. And I was just like, I'm sorry to say, no, actually, no, I'm not. I just remember probably my 5th through 7 months there, I was like, okay, this is not going to change. This is systemic. And in order for me to change this, I'm going to have to care a lot more about other people's behaviors, other people understanding. I'm just not interested, equipped to do that right now. And so what I did was something that I'm not normally doing, where I let my work plateau. I was like, whatever, I'm going to do the bare minimum because that's what everybody's doing. And then towards the end, I was like, I didn't like the person I was seeing there. I didn't like the attitude that I had. And then once I reflected after that, I was like, actually, I was living outside of integrity. I was working outside of integrity.
Absolutely. I can just tell you that this is the exact same thing that happened to me. At some point, you realize that, okay, I'm just going to do the bare minimum because that's what everyone else is doing.
Mhm.
And that is just not who I am and how I want to. For me, it was the place where I would never be satisfied with the work, but I also didn't feel like me being satisfied with it would change anything. Point in putting that effort and motivation. So that's when you start scoring that things are really bad. There's a really important thing I want to add. We often hear about, like, you can be positive, you can motivate yourself and look at the silver lining of everything. I realized you can, when things out of your control, something happens that you just couldn't. It's like a couple of years ago when we had the pandemic, we had to stay at home. Nothing you can do about it. That's just the reality you're living in at the moment. Find the silver lining. Figure out what are you going to do with that time that you have? How are you going to spend it? What I did in that time. I was studying my PhD years ago. I started working after the end of my PhD and I didn't finish writing the thesis. Just went to work at the same time I had my kid. And then, it becomes, life, right? When are you going to finish a PhD? Well, I finished it during pandemic because I had time. And I was like, you know what? What am I going to do with this time? I have a small kid. I'm at home. Sure, I have to work. But at the end of the day, I'm stuck here. So I'm just going to write this last paper, finish this off, and defend my thesis and become the doctor that I am now. But then there is this part where you can think of the positive thing here in this work environment where you are in a toxic culture that does not align with what you believe. You cannot motivate your way out of there. It doesn't matter how much energy you bring in, you will not motivate yourself out. It is within your control to change that. You can get yourself out of there. I'm not saying, like, go crazy and quit your job without a plan or whatever.
Exactly.
You do whatever you can with the means that you have, but you can get out of there. Those are two different things where you can motivate yourself and find the silver lining. I think it's important that we understand that it doesn't work always.
Exactly. And I like that what you're landing on is like, take more ownership of your life. So there's some privileges that you may have, and I fully understand that. And there are other alternatives. If you're working for a gas station, there's another gas station you can work at. So it's like, find the things that you can control and do those. In my situation, I'm fortunate to say, hey, I just don't want to be here. And I'm not gonna be here. I'm gonna figure it out, right? Because I've built a life earlier where I'm like, hey, I don't want to be caught off guard. So I'm gonna go on a cushion. And that was one of the situations where I just want to be caught off guard. I just didn't like the person that I was because I was stressed. I was being short with people, and that's not who I am. I value manners. So I was like, okay,
Yeah.
let me be in a
Yeah.
situation where I can choose who I and how I want to show up.
There's a very important part about the environment and the things that influence you and how you can get yourself out of that situation if you feel like that situation is not in line with.
Yep.
Everyone has a little bit of control over where we are and how we show up. And of course, the circumstances are different, and we are very fortunate in many ways, but there's always a place for maneuver. What I wanted to add to this conversation, and something I personally struggled with a couple of years ago, is actually squeezing out of yourself what are your values. Now, how do you know what is important to you? How do you know what is important to you because of the society, the culture where you grew up, the environment where you are? What do you know?
Yeah.
How do you know what your values are?
I think for me, everything you mentioned is how my values are informed, right?
Mm.
That come from where I'm living. My upbringing is very important in how I've developed my values, right? So I think the first thing for me to remember is that values is going to sound antithetical, but it's relative to where who you are, right? So, for example, if I'm in political circles, which I'm not,
Yeah.
political, I know my value of courage and candor needs to be a bit blunted in order for me to give the perception that I'm nice to work with, right? And that's something, if you're in politics, you need to understand that's just the way that game is,
Mm.
right? But if I'm with friends or my team, I'm like, let's lower the shoulders from the earlobes, right? And like, I'm sorry, like I don't want to think about how I'm influencing my friend, right? I just want to like, hey, if like
Right.
if my like, let's say for example, I love this sweater, but if you're like, actually, PJ, red doesn't go well with your skin color, I'll be like, okay, cool. I will wear it in the house, especially if it's a friend. You know what I mean? I need your values to be fluid relative to who
Yeah.
you are.
Yeah, that's true. I agree with that, that there's certain things that you adapted, but I do think that there's certain things that will always be true. And maybe like I will give you for myself, I discovered that I value and find super important is kindness. It's just showing up with kindness to people. That doesn't mean trying to make people like me. If you ever talk to anyone who worked with me on my teams, they'll tell you, no, my goal is not for people to like me, but to show up kindly, respect other people, and tell them when things are going okay and when they are not. Give them that feedback instead of pretending that things are okay. Kindness and candor together. I think that just being honest about how you see things is important. It doesn't mean that my way of seeing things is right. This is just my way of seeing things. I'm aware that someone can see them differently, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. That is really important to me. When I cannot show up with that kindness and candor. I know that sometimes it can be too much for people,
Mhm.
but when it becomes an obstacle in me being able to do my job, that's a problem. When I cannot be honest about the situation where we are, how things are going, what I see and what I think we need to do, that's something that really bothers me. I had situations in my work when I was in a leadership position and I was told by my senior leadership that I've got to be more political
Yeah.
if I want to.
Yeah. Yeah, you and I share that. And maybe the political circle is the extreme end.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree. I like the addition of kindness to candor, my very intrinsic values, because if you can't be honest with me, we can't solve thoroughly, right? This whole notion of you need to be more political with your teams, with the people around you. And I was like, this may sound harsh, but I think they just need to grow a backbone. If they don't like it, help me understand what they don't like. If they don't like the problem or the solution, then we can solve for that. But if they don't like the way they feel about it, then that's something I can't solve for right now. But my intention is to
Yeah.
be honest so we can thoroughly problem solve.
Absolutely. It's the same for me. Let's put everything on the table, understand what is the problem we are solving.
Yep.
Bringing that honesty to discussions really helps. It's interesting to have a discussion about software architecture where we could think, oh, we could do this, we can do that, but let's bring on the money to the table. There's no money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, just understand that,
Yeah.
that there is a certain realities that you have to live with. And when we don't necessarily bring all of them, the solutions are not always working. But yeah, that's one thing that, when you see that it's not working and things start not work for you, I still wanted to dig in a little bit deeper on how did you discover that this is something that is important for you?
Okay, so how did I discover that it's important for me? It goes back to the way I don't want to have to feel like I lead a
Mhm.
very relaxed life. I enjoy, going to the beach or just lounging by the pool, right? So I want to be able to do more of that, spending time with my family, my friends. But if I'm spending more time trying to understand what the person actually meant, then it's more time away from my family, my friends, the beach. So I think it's more about the trade off for how I'm working, how I'm living my life. To answer your question, it's how does not living my values affect how I can live my life? If I'm constantly lying or if I'm not being as candid as I am, I should have to remember what I said to that person.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
when I interact with that person again, I'm like, okay, I told them this iteration of the truth.
The mental handling
Yeah,
becomes overbearing
exactly.
at some point. I don't want that complexity in my head to try and think
Yeah,
of what was the story that I said here and what is the story I said here.
yeah,
It's just much easier to,
yeah. I guess I'm
yeah.
more so saying how I got to my values is to lead a simple life.
Yeah.
I don't want to be important. I don't want to have a complex life. I want to be able to say, hey, Carolina, do you want to go for a coffee on Tuesday? And not have to remember, did I tell Carolina that I was busy on that day? Or did she tell me? It's like, I
Yeah.
just want to be able to be.
No, that's a very important thing to have that headspace to say, hey, that's what I want to do and I can do it. There are certain values that help you with that. I think for me, I was thinking about it a lot. Like I said, for the last, I think, 4 years have been a big path for me of like self-discovery, discovering where some of my values come from. Why this started is interesting when my kid was born and certain things happened that you're like, well, this is how it needs to be. And then you look in yourself and say, well, why do you feel so strongly that they cannot make a mess under the table? Like where those things that are such strong beliefs that you have, and where do they come from? Why do they show up in your life to the point where you're like, no, this is not okay, we're gonna have a mess in the house or whatever. The thing is that you go on this discovery journey of why is this important for me. Before I met my husband and had kids, I would always be like, oh no, the space around me has to be super organized. It's just like super clean, spotless. Things are like just super nice. And then things change because you start having other people around you and you cannot control them. When I was going through this process and thinking, why is this so important to me? The question I would always ask myself was, when did it start showing up in me that I was that way? What I discovered was it's a very simple thing that there was a lot of things that were like out of control in my life when I was growing up. But there was one thing I could control. I could have a total control of how my room looked, how the space around me looked,
Yeah.
how much time I put in there. It was a way of living. The whole world is out of control. You cannot control a lot of things happening around you. But this is something I can control. So I can my room every day.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was my search for more control that led me there. This journey of understanding why this is so important to you is crucial to actually understanding where your values are, why they are your, and if they are really still your values. If they are
Exactly.
something that you took when you were growing up in your home, then going to the career world and living through different companies, you get all these inputs from outside. But which of those agree with you and which are just there because someone told you that's the way we do things?
I think what you're getting back is really deep reflection, right? I like to lead a simple life, easygoing, because as a young adult, I was very much depended on by my family.
Mm.
I'm the eldest of 10 kids. It was always, we need you to do this for your siblings. Having the ability to just say, no, I'm going to just chill at home, go to the beach or go for a
Yeah.
leisurely coffee wasn't afforded to me when I was a kid. Now I'm like, I'm going to be the most chill, lazy person I can be to make up for time. You're getting me to think about this a little bit more.
Yeah, that's the thing. It really helps in discovering your values and the things that are important to you to go into yourself and understand those patterns. Where do they come from? Because we all have them. Why do I say it's important and what does it matter for your life? Because you will be in an environment where you cannot live according to your values, and that will make you sick.
Yeah.
Like in many ways, it will make you mentally sick, it will make you physically sick, it will like really affect your relationships,
Yes.
socially sick. There is different ways, you know, that you can be sick. It's not just I have a cold, right? There's many different ways that this will manifest in your life. I think that doing deep, what are my values? What do I actually find important? Type of work for ourselves is important for us
Yeah.
and for those around us.
I agree.
Is there anything else you wanted to share with you and I who will listen to this back?
Able to capture everything related to values in this session. Values are fluid depending on who you're with and where you are in life. If you return to the very synthesized version of your values, I think you'll be okay. Even in this conversation, I was able to understand more about why I value certain things. So why I value a simple life, right? Try to have an open discussion about it and be open to being wrong, having your values iterated. It doesn't mean that your values are loose. It just means that you're getting a bit deeper into why you value that.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Just because something is important for me right now, it might be that later it will not be because I understand something else about who I am, what I value, where I come from, and what is important to me.
Exactly.
So, be candid and kind to yourself.
Mhm.
It's easy to live those values outside, but it's also important to live them internally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Thank you, BJ. This was a great conversation as always. I hope it helps someone out there to figure out what is important in their life.
Bye.